Hey, everybody, and welcome to our lecture today on nuggets of neuroscience and their effects on creative thinking. This is a lecture that I put together based on a presentation that I saw a while back by a guy named Mark Hurwitz. Got a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, so he's pretty much an authority on this stuff. It's a really interesting topic. I thought it was pretty relevant to a course where I try to express, a lot of the importance of critical thinking and creative thinking. And so, it's not necessarily a topic that's directly related to, working in a project team or anything, but it's more of a lecture on, some tips and tools and tricks that you can use from the field of cognitive neuroscience to, help you approach problems more creatively. All right. So with that, let's just jump in, and I'll give you a high-level overview of the 12 nuggets that we're going to talk about, and then after that, we'll dive deeper into each of them. So the first one is your whole brain is working all the time and energy is limited. The second one, system 2 thinking is necessary for complex decisions. And this is as opposed to system 1 thinking. So we'll get into that more later. Third one, the brain has space constraints. Believe it or not, our brain and the abilities that it possesses are constrained in a sense by the size of your skull. All right, number 4, there are only a few ways to make the brain better. A lot of people would have you believe that there's a lot of other ways that you can get yourself, smarter and do this and do. Nope, not really. There's only a few ways. The fifth one, the conscious brain is the tip of the iceberg. There are actually ways to leverage other parts of your brain to help you solve problems, especially in a more creative way. Number 6, the brain integrates new facts by adding them to old facts, not by replacing them. This is a really interesting one, especially as it relates to cognitive bias, implicit bias, that kind of stuff. And so we'll talk about what you can do to help make your brain more flexible when you need to add new facts. The brain-body loop is critical for health brain function. This one is connected in a sense to there are only a few ways to make the brain better. Number 8, learning is best done visually and even better by involving additional senses. This was a nugget of neuroscience that I never really thought about, but after hearing it makes a lot of sense, and it also changed a lot of the ways that I try to present information from the perspective of a lecturer or a teacher. Number 9, to get more creative, involve senses in a new way. This is a really interesting one. We'll talk more about that in a sec. Number 10, the brain is highly sensitive to social signals. Number 11, you can't really multitask. You task switch. Some of you may have already realized this. And then finally, avoid pop neuroscience. All right, so with that, let's jump into the first nugget of neuroscience. And that one is your whole brain is working all the time and energy is limited. All right, so it turns out the brain can't allocate energy to many things at once. All right, your brain is a pretty busy device inside of your body. Not only is it regulating all of your bodily functions like breathing and pumping your heart and making sure that you stay awake and alert and all those other things, but it's also, gathering in hundreds, if not thousands, of different stimuli from all the various, sensors on your body, the sense of touch, sense of taste, hearing, sight, smell, all that kind of stuff. All the different sensors that you have available, the senses, are all being fed into your brain. And then on top of all this, your brain has to think at the same time. All right. So with that, if it's trying to do too much, it just has to start taking energy from other things. All right. It stores no fuel. All right. The brain is simply just a big pile of gray matter. There's no fuel up there. All right. It takes it from the rest of your body. So if the rest of your body is running on low on fuel, then your brain most certainly is. Running it on empty degrades performance, much like a car sputters to a stop if it runs out of fuel, whether that's gasoline or a new fancy electric car. It needs fuel, and if it's running on empty, it's not going to do much. So as an example of this, a study was done to show, what happens when someone goes up for parole in prison. So parole is like you go before a parole board and they look at all the evidence to decide whether or not you should be let out of prison early. All right. And so the study showed that a convict, a person currently in jail, had a 70% chance of being paroled, i.e. let go, if they were paroled in the morning before lunch, essentially, as opposed to only a 30% chance in the afternoon. Presumably, this study took in all the different factors that you would hope, and that the only factor was the difference in the time of day. But if it's to believe, that's pretty shocking that your chances of getting paroled in the morning are more than double those if you're going up for parole in the afternoon. There's also been more research that was done on students to measure their cognitive performance at various points in the day, and it showed that test scores decreased by approximately 1% of a standard deviation for every hour later in the day. Okay, so you get up, and then every hour that the day ticks along, you lose 1% in performance on your test scores. Yeah. In addition, it found that if you took a 20 to 30 minute break, it improved average test scores. Okay. And the reason that's the case, essentially, is that as the day progressed, the students' mental resources got taxed, all right, and they got tired, wound down, all right. Another study in 2016 showed essentially that cognitive fatigue influences students' performance on standardized tests. So if you're going to have a test, probably not a good idea to stay up the night before trying to cram everything in, because you're actually going to decrease your performance. All right, neuroscience nugget number 2. System 2 thinking is necessary for complex decisions. And as a little side to this, System 1 thinking is your default. All right, so System 1 thinking is fast thinking. Like if somebody said, answer this question, and then they give you a question, boom, System 1 thinking is what happens immediately, like right away, your initial intuitive response. Critical thinking is System 2 thinking, all right, when you actually have to sit down and think about a complex problem for a while and try to figure out the answer, all right? So, some stuff about System 2 thinking. It's energy and resource intensive, and you can really only do one of these types of activities at a time. You can't be doing System 2 thinking on 3 different things all at the same time, all right? The second bullet point is it's slow and requires subject matter expertise. Okay, if you don't have the expertise, you aren't going to be able to participate in effective and appropriate System 2 thinking. Okay, if you want people to make complex decisions, all right, you need the following. You have to make sure that they're fed and well rested. You have to ensure that there are no competing priorities so that they don't get stuck trying to do more than one thing at a time. You have to make sure that they have the skills. They need to have the expertise to be able to start thinking about these complex decisions with System 2 thinking. So here's an example of System 1 versus System 2 thinking. It's a pretty classic example. I think it even came from a book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. All right, so the question is, a bat and ball cost $1.10. The bat cost $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Now, System 1 thinking, if you do this really quickly, all right, the bat and ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. People are going to be like, oh, the bat must cost $1 and the ball costs 10 cents, right? But if you think about that for a second, the bat costs $1, the ball costs 10 cents. That together they cost $1.10, but the bat actually costs 90 cents more than the ball. So that's actually violating the second part of the question. All right, so in System 1 thinking, in the fast thinking, you really only just sort of paid attention to the first part and then kind of the first half of the second sentence where it says the bat costs $1 more, and then you're just like, oh, it's $1, and then the ball has to be 10 cents, right? But if you actually did System 2 thinking and you thought about this for a while, you would realize that the ball actually costs 5 cents and the bat costs $1.05, which is $1 more than the 5 cents. All right, so the first time I was ever posed this question, I got it wrong. I put out 10 cents as the cost of the ball, which was wrong, right? But then upon further reflection, and if I actually sat back and used a little bit of System 2 thinking, and oh, it's a nickel, not a dime. All right, one thing to note from this then is that you cannot think harder and you cannot think faster. All right, System 2 thinking is System 2 thinking. You can't take System 1 thinking and just speed it up and all of a sudden be doing System 2 thinking. You can't just try real hard and just be like, oh, I think I can learn nuclear physics in 5 seconds and then, build a nuclear bomb. No, you can't. All right, you can't just think harder and think faster. You have to have the expertise. You have to have, no competing priorities, and you have to have an environment, physically that's well rested and well fed. All right, neuroscience neuroscience nugget number 3. The brain has space constraints. Apparently, my brain's got some serious space constraints right now. All right, so being good at one thing often means that you get worse at another. All right, that's sort of the gist of this whole thing, is that if you want to get really good at one thing, expect other things in your brain to come at the expense of that, right? So here's an example. A study was done on cab drivers. I believe this was in London, to measure their ability to, remember things. Okay. And so if you've never been to London, I'll just tell you right now, the streets in London are crazy complex. All right. They're incredibly twisty and turny, mostly because London's been around for longer than cars have been around. Okay. And so if you're going to develop those complex city maps inside of your head, you're going to have to increase the size of what's called your posterior hippocampus. All right. And if you do that, since the brain has space constraints, it's not like your skull's going to increase in size. That'd be kind of crazy if it did. Like the more you learn, your head just like blows up like a balloon, right? No, it doesn't, right? Your head or your skull is made of bone. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to stretch. So what happens is, as the posterior hippocampus gets bigger, it comes at the expense of the anterior hippocampus getting smaller. All right. And the anterior hippocampus is used for doing things like learning about spatial relationships and names. All right. So they found that these taxi cab drivers, as they started to develop this complex knowledge of the City of London's maps, they started forgetting things, or they started finding it harder to learn other things like the names of people. All right. So if you want to look at those, there's a couple of links over there in the slides, but you can, read more about those studies. All right. So nothing is free unless you improve the brain. So that's what we're going to talk about next. How do you improve the brain? All right. Turns out there's only a few different ways to make your brain any healthier. The first one, exercise regularly and try to take time to relax, meditate, whatever. All right. Exercising, and I'm totally someone who doesn't adhere to this policy. I should exercise a lot more than I do. It actually helps your brain. Okay, it increases your body's ability to be healthy, et cetera, et cetera. So try to get out there and exercise regularly, and then meditate and relax to remove stress and anxiety from your life. Very important in the times that we're in right now. All right, next, eat enough, not too little, but also not too much. All right, your brain has to have fuel. We talked about that, but it can't have too much fuel. All right, because if your body has unspent fuel, it's going to end up turning into fat, and then you're not going to be healthy anymore, and then your brain's going to go sideways on that. Issue. Right? So eat just enough to stay healthy. With that, it should be a good diet. All right? You want to have the foods that are going to provide you the appropriate energy. You don't just want to fill up on sugar. All right? You want to have the appropriate fuel for your body. All right? You don't want to fill up your unleaded engine with diesel gas or something. You want to have the right kind of fuel. You also want to get sleep. All right? This is something that I also try really hard to do, but never end up accomplishing because there's so much YouTube to watch, right? No, just kidding. 7 to 8 hours a night is what studies have shown is the most effective amount of sleep for humans to get. We evolved sleeping during the nocturnal parts of the day, when there's no sun. All right. We developed circadian rhythms, and if you try to go against that, you're essentially going against evolution, and that is pretty much a bad idea, right? You want to try to stick with evolution. So all these things combined together, healthy body leads to a healthy brain. Another thing that you can do is, how do you work just on the brain, right? It has nothing to do with the body, and that's learn complex new skills, okay? So things like languages, or something connected to music, like learn a new instrument, whatever. Learn a new subject, something like that. But brain games, for the most part, are just a myth, okay? They try to come across as, the best way to learn or to make your brain increase is to do crossword puzzles or whatever. But unless crossword puzzles are considered to you to be a complex new skill, you're not going to learn too much by doing things like you would find in those brain games that you get for your phone or whatever. Just go into the app store of whatever and look up brain games. Those things are all a myth for the most part. Okay, neuroscience nugget number 5. The conscious brain is the tip of the iceberg. Ooh, sounds fancy, right? So this has a lot to do with something called working memory. Okay, working memory is the stuff that allows you to remember things like instantly, right? If somebody tells you their phone number, for example, working memory is going to be what stores that for a certain amount of time. And it turns out working memory is very limited. It can only hold 5 plus or minus 2 things at a time. So anywhere between 3 and 7 things at a time can actually sit inside of your working memory. If you want to take a working memory test, there's a couple of links and discussions over there. Actually, the second link is actually for let me Google that for you with working memory test, but still, it'll get you to something. So take one of those things and see how small your working memory actually is. You might be shocked. All right. Next part of this, the subconscious has tons more computing power, but using it is tricky. All right. So you have your conscious brain, your working memory, the stuff that's like aware of what's going on when you're awake. But you also have this subconscious, the part of your brain that you're not really aware of that's doing work in the background. And in order for you to make use of your subconscious brain, right, you have to have several things available. First, you have to have relevant expertise, okay, and experience in the topic that you're trying to work with. You also have to have time and likely some sort of a distraction. So I don't know how many times that I've been distracted by something, and sleep is considered a distraction for your conscious brain. That I'll be just doing something completely unrelated to what I'm trying to do, and all of a sudden an idea pops into my head. Okay, that was my subconscious brain working in the background on that problem. All right, and by doing something else, do some sort of a distraction, I essentially let my conscious brain get out of the way. All right. And this is directly related to this other concept that I just brought up in the next bullet point that says that if you don't have the expertise in an area of interest, any form of intuition that you have on a complex subject is complete BS. All right, it's completely false. Unless you have expertise in a subject, you can't just intuitively know the answer to that subject. All right, there's all sorts of examples of current political statements that have been made, by a certain individual that says, "Oh, I'm the best at understanding this and I'm the best at understanding that," but that's impossible. All right, because if that person is not an expert in the area that they're trying to intuit on, if intuit is even a word, it looks like my voice capturing thing says that Intuit is the company, but whatever. That person can't have a correct intuitive thought on something. All right, my intuition is that the hurricane's going to go this way. Well, who cares? Are you a meteorologist? Did you study hurricanes? No? Then shut your mouth. All right, because you have no idea what you're talking about. All right. So finally, in other words, you can't be intuitive about something if you don't know anything about it. Yeah, I already said that. All right, so one other thing that I wanted to talk about in this as a form of a distraction. One distraction that I found is very effective is to go and take a shower. All right, think in the shower. It's just like you're just sitting there. The shower is it's intended to be sort of a relaxing experience. It allows your conscious brain to just get out of the way. And let your subconscious brain work in the background. Your subconscious brain is always there doing something, right? Whether or not you are aware of it, it's always chugging along on something in the background. So if you give it time to work on this stuff, then you'll be able to do that stuff better. All right, on to neuroscience nugget number 6. The brain integrates new facts by adding them to old facts, not by replacing them. All right, so one example of this happening is you might agree with somebody on some point on one day, like political opinion or something, or an analysis of some information that you just gathered. But the very next day, that person reverses their decision, right? Because essentially they've given themselves time to integrate the new facts that they've just observed. All right. This is also why it's really hard for people to overcome implicit bias. All right. Implicit bias, if you don't remember, is that it's a cognitive bias. It's built in to sort of the way you think, and it's been formed over the years and decades of your prior experience. And it's just sort of an accumulation of all those old experiences that causes you to think about something in a certain way. All right. And so if you're trying to overcome that, it's going to take some effort to overcome those implicit biases, because you integrate new facts by adding them onto the old. All right. You can't just replace the old facts or the old experiences. You have to modify them in a certain way. You have to combine them with your old facts. So there are several ways that you can overcome this accumulation of old information. First is repetition, especially over time. All right, you had a long time to add up those old facts and to gather that old information, and so the more time that you have and the more repetition that you have of the new facts, the better it's going to be for your ability to integrate that new information into what you knew from before. All right, the second is to have strong emotional cues, right? To appeal to the emotions of the person to help compound the impact of the new facts. The next is to reduce environmental cues that are associated with the old facts. All right, I'll give an example of all this stuff in a second. And then the next is to be consistent with the new facts and to seek clarity. Oops, and that was it. All right, so those four things. So one of the big examples I like to discuss on this one here is climate change. Okay, climate change is real. Science says it's real, and science is real. All right, so first off, if you have someone that is a climate change denier, and I'm not talking about global warming, right? I'm talking about climate change. The climate is changing, and it's been scientifically shown to be changing. What the reasoning is behind that is most likely human activity, but let's just sort of divorce that away from the conversation here and instead just focus on the fact that the climate is changing, right? So you need to have that repeated to you over and over and over again. You need to see it over and over and over again. The next one, strong emotional cues. It has to sort of hit you where it hurts, so to speak, right? Maybe go buy a house on the coast and watch it slowly get covered by water, right? Homes that are on islands, for example, that are being overtaken by rising sea levels. Okay, those are a stark example for the people that live there of strong emotional cues, because these people are literally losing their homes to changes in the climate. The next one, reduce environmental cues associated with old facts. Basically, in this situation, stay around other climate change deniers, right? If you're surrounding yourself by other people that have the same views as you, the same old views that are, not correct, it's going to be harder for you to learn the new facts, all right? Or this is very sort of specific to environmental stuff with global warming, but like don't go live in the mountains of Antarctica, or I don't even know if there's mountains in Antarctica, but don't go and live in Antarctica and then try to see if there's climate change, all right, unless you're living on one of those glaciers that's slowly sliding into the ocean. All right, and then finally, be consistent with new facts and seek clarity. Okay, make sure that the new facts are always well presented with the appropriate amount of evidence. You don't want to mislead anyone. You don't want to make any vague claims, and also if there is any information that's a little bit unclear, make sure that you clarify it, okay, so that everything is presented in the best way possible. All right, so you can move past these implicit biases, this old information that might be sitting around in your brain, but it's going to take some time and some effort for you to overcome those things. All right, neuroscience nugget number 7. The brain-body loop is critical for health brain function. This is actually related in a sense to nugget number 4, I believe. Let's go back to number 4 real quick. Oh, shoot, it's way far back there. There it is, yeah. There's only a few ways to make the brain better. All right, so number 7, when your body's not functioning well, neither is your decision-making, okay? If your body is out of sync physically, if it doesn't have enough fuel, if it's tired, if it's sore, whatever, your decision-making is going to be impacted, okay? Or if you go on the other end of the spectrum, if you drink too much coffee, all right, and you're just like, and you're so like crazy, just amped up, your decision-making is also not going to be very appropriate. All right, you need emotions to make decisions, and don't pretend that they exist. This is connected to the previous nugget right here. Strong emotional cues. They're going to help you to learn and accumulate new knowledge on top of old facts. Okay, so you need those emotions to help you make decisions. You can't just be like a robot in a box, right? You have to have emotions. All right, so here's some impact. Positive emotions. They're good for divergent thought. Negative emotions are good for convergent thought. Now, I'm not saying that like negative emotions, like you have to be all angry all the time or anything like that. I'm talking about negative in the sense that you have to be able to narrow a set of topics down when you're doing convergent thinking. All right, divergent thinking is when you're trying to come up with all the different possible ways of doing something and sort of expanding the scope of the solutions that you can come up with to a problem. And then convergent thinking is where you have to narrow all of those solutions down to a single point. And so divergent thinking, if you have positive emotions, it's going to help you, to think more creatively and all that kind of stuff, and to expand the scope of your vision. Whereas negative thinking, when you're trying to converge on something, is actively pruning ideas and getting rid of stuff. So having a negative mindset in there is actually going to be helpful overall for you to make a decision. All right, positive emotions are good for taking risks, negative for avoiding it, right? So if you're approaching like a really stressful choice point in your life, like should I take a job or should I stay in school longer or whatever, having positive emotions are going to be helpful for you when you actually do decide to do one or the other. Be positive about it. Avoiding risk, just be negative, right? Be like, oh, I'm scared that I'm going to like trip and fall, so I guess I won't walk on that trail, right? But the negative emotions aren't necessarily going to lead to an overall positive outcome, because you're probably going to miss out on something. Okay, so if you are going to take a risk, and you have to do that in life, you can't live life without taking any risks. All right, have positive emotions, and it'll be more helpful. All right, next, chronic stress is bad. Now, I have a YouTube link for this. It's not so easy for me to watch a video at the same time as you. I highly recommend watching this. It's only 2.5, 3 minutes long, and it actually shows some studies of how chronic stress impacts the overall like behavior and abilities of I think it was rats, right? But I'm thinking that most of you can probably understand just from just a basic perspective that chronic stress, in other words, stress that is always there and always in your life, is not a good thing, right? If you're always stressed about studying, or always stressed about your exams or getting projects done or whatever on time, or always stressing out about working on a bad team or whatever, or on a project that's not going anywhere, overall that's going to be bad for the project. So it's always best to try to mitigate those stress factors so that the chronic stress is no longer as significant of an issue. Okay, there's always going to be a little bit of stress in life. I mean, I have kids, right? that's enough stress in and of itself. But there are many things that you can do to help mitigate that. And the end of the video actually talks about a few of those things. We've already talked about them: exercise, meditation, anything to sort of calm your mind and not think so much about the parts of your life that are causing you so much stress. All right, neuroscience nugget number 8. Learning is likely, in parentheses here, best done visually, and even better by involving additional senses. Okay, so this was probably the most shocking of all the nuggets that I learned when I attended this presentation. And the reason why this is the case is that 50% of the neurons that you're working with when you're learning something are involved in visual processing. In fact, actually, 50% of your neurons are involved in visual processing, not just when you're learning something. All right, so humans are very visual with respect to how we use our brains, right? Half of our neurons are involved in processing what we see. So it probably makes the most sense to do stuff visually. Okay, so learning styles are pretty much a myth because of that, right? Because half your brain is devoted to processing what you visualize. Why not learn using those 50% of your neurons as opposed to the other 50%, which are for everything else. All right. So if you don't believe me, there's some articles here. This first one is from The Atlantic. The title is "The Myth of Learning Styles." It's only from a few years back, so very relevant from a timely perspective. Here's another actual study that was done by NIH, the National Institute of Health, or something like that. Or at least it's published there. I'm not sure if they're the ones who actually did it, but what they did is they took a bunch of students and they gave them this questionnaire to determine what kind of learner they were. All right, and you've probably heard about all the different learning styles, like visual, auditory, sensory, all that kind of stuff. And then it gave them study strategies that were correlated with that learning style, right? So if somebody identified as a visual learner, they were given study strategies for visual learning, or if they identified as an auditory learner, they were given, auditory study strategies. What they found is that the students, I'll just read it to you. They found that not only did students not study in ways that seemed to reflect their style, those who did tailor their studying to suit their style didn't do any better on their tests. So basically, the students didn't study in the style that was reflected by the questionnaire they took, and when they did attempt to study in that style, all right, when they did tailor their studying towards their specific learning style, it didn't do any better on their tests, right? And then there was another study, a related study to this. Actually, no, it's the exact same study because it's the same stinking link. So what they found is that students who describe themselves as visual learners figured that they would be able to remember pictures better, and people that said that they were verbal learners or auditory learners said that they'd remember words better. All right. But those preferences had no actual correlation to what they remembered later on, right? Words or pictures. So the gist of this whole thing, by the way, that was my smoke detector going off. I think somebody burned something in the oven. All the learning styles, all it really meant was that some people liked words or pictures better. Not that words or pictures worked better for their memories. All right. People just preferred visual learning, or they preferred pictures as opposed to preferring words. They didn't work any better if they were used one way or the other for learning. Okay. So yeah, kind of a crazy thing for me to think, because I've always been told that, like, try to tailor your teaching to all the different learning styles that are out there. But as it turns out, there really is a better way of teaching, and that's visually. All right. So coming up with examples using images, pictures. Obviously, this slide is a terrible example of visual learning. A graph or a chart would probably be better, but I really wanted to sort of convey the scienciness of these results by providing links and quotes, because whatever seems more legit. I don't know, but a graph would probably be more effective here. All right, so neuroscience nugget number 9. To get more creative involves senses in a new way. And there are many senses, okay? It's not just the ones that you would think of, what are called Aristotelian senses, okay? Taste, touch, sight, smell, and hearing. All right, there are other senses that you can involve to help yourself be more creative. So, for example, temperature, or vibration, or itch. This is called thermoception, at least for temperature. So try going on a walk when it's hot outside or when it's cold outside, and just switch up the temperature. Vestibular senses. So these are your senses of, like, equilibrium or acceleration, rotation, inertia. Like when you're in a car, if you just close your eyes and then somebody just accelerates incredibly fast, you have this notion of being accelerated forward, right? It's not touch necessarily, because you're not touching anything new, and you're not, I mean, you probably could hear, I guess, if it was a gas engine, you could hear it revving, but you're not seeing anything or smelling anything if you shut your eyes, and it's not like somebody's putting something in your mouth to taste. They're not cooking in the car. All right. So you do have this sense of motion occurring around you. It's equilibrium, like your inner ear. All right, the next one is what's called interoception. These are some weird ones. So things like feeling full, like when you're hungry. Is that a sense of touch? Well, not really, because your stomach's inside your body, right? So, or the fact that you have to go to the bathroom. It's not like you're like something's touching you that makes you have to go to the bathroom, right? Chest or muscle tension. If you're just like, if you're stressed out, you can feel that your muscles are tensing up. Whether you're thirsty or hungry. I already sort of talked about the hunger thing. And then anything else that's internally directed. Okay, any internally directed senses. There's also proprioception. This is a really interesting one. Knowing where your body parts are. All right, so if you just like close your eyes and just sit, you sort of know where all your body parts are. Like, I know where my knees are right now. I know where my toes are. And probably one of the best ways to know or to understand that this is an actual thing is for people that lose their limbs, for example. All right, if you're in like an accident or something and you lose like your arm, or if you lose your foot or whatever, those types of people often develop something called phantom limbs, right, where they feel like their arm is there, or they feel that their foot is there, but it's actually not, right? And so their proprioception is out of whack because that, you know, physical part of their body is no longer there, but their brain is so used to it being there, it proprioceives. I don't even know if that's a word, but yeah, my little text thingy right down here certainly didn't think that proprioceive is a word. Profile sieve, I love it. Their body is still thinking that it's there, right? All right, then there's other thing called nociception. This is just the concept of feeling pain or nausea, especially for those people that have like chronic pain. There's no like actual specific physical reason that can be pointed to for having chronic pain, except your body is just in pain and you feel pain, all right? And then there's also chronoception, the sense of passing of time. Like if you sit in a room with nothing happening, you have a sense of the passing of time, right? That time is moving forward. And you'd have a sense of, you know, the difference between, say, a few seconds as opposed to a few minutes, as opposed to a few hours. Certainly a few days, right? So you have a sense of the passing of time. You might not be able to calculate it exactly, but you know the difference between how long roughly a second is as opposed to how long like an hour is, okay? So if you think like, what are some things that are out there to stimulate the above senses? And this is in the interest of like, how can you get more creative? All right, so how could you stimulate your Aristotelian senses, right? So if you want to try to think more creatively, maybe go cook a really fancy dish or something that's really aromatic and like stimulates your sense of smell or taste, right? Or go listen to some music, whether it's techno or classical, whatever. Just go listen to some music, or go outside and just go on a walk in the woods and like feel the breeze on your skin, right? Those kinds of things. You're also going to tap into your thermoception by doing that. I'm not sure if like going into a car and like accelerating really quickly is going to make you more creative, but it certainly is going to impact that vestibular senses. Yeah, and so I would imagine you can come up with the other. I'm not advocating anything for proprioception. We're just going to go with that. Don't change any part of your body in any way so that you can try to test that one. But or the nociception. Don't like make yourself sick or hurt yourself to see if that's going to cause you to be more creative. But you know, maybe interoception, you could like try thinking on an empty stomach or something. That probably would be a negative impact. I don't know. Sensing the pass of time, I don't know. Just go sit in a room for a while for like 20 minutes. Don't do anything and see what happens. Get out of the way of your conscious mind and let your subconscious take over, right? Okay, the next nugget is the brain is highly sensitive to social signals. And this is a pretty easy one to talk about. Just try to be social, all right? It's going to hopefully increase the impact of an activity. Humans evolved to be social animals, right? We talked about evolution, I think, a little bit earlier. You don't want to try to go against evolution. You need your sleep. You also need to be social, right? The only reason that humans are successful as a species in general, and what I mean by successful is that we have become, you know, a civilized. We've basically become a civilization that can create cities and be technically advanced and all that kind of stuff, is the fact that we were able to create a social framework to exist in, right? We had, you know, tribes and social groups that were able to support each other and to, you know, help overcome adversity, and all that kind of stuff. So if you completely remove yourself from that type of an interaction where you have absolutely no social contact with anyone, you're sort of denying yourself an activity or a way of being that has been programmed into your body by evolution. Okay, and it's going to be kind of hard to function if you have no social interaction. All right. I went to, interestingly, at the same place that I saw this presentation, I went to a presentation on how to live in the bush. Bush being like the middle of nowhere, like in Australia. If you go out and live in the bush, you know, with you have like a machete and a flint, and that's all you have to work with. How long can you go without various things? And so there was this, I don't know if it's an actual thing or if it was just the guy talking to me about it, but he's like, everything is in like threes. He said you can go for like or maybe, I don't know, it was something like you can go for 3 or 30 seconds without air. You can go for like 3 days without water. You can go for 3 weeks without food, and you can go for 3 months. And nobody could really figure it out. We're like, go for what's so magical about 3 months? Well, it turns out 3 months is without any social interaction. All right. After about 3 months, if you've ever seen the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, you start to go a little bit crazy and you start talking to a volleyball. All right. So after those 3 months, if you've never been around other people and had any form of social interaction whatsoever, things start going a little weird. Okay. And so the same sort of thing applies to the way that you operate in sort of a normal situation or in the normal world. If you don't have any social interactions with anyone, things start to get tough. Okay. And so in the time of virtual learning and virtual classes and all that kind of stuff, if you aren't giving yourself the time to go out and be social with, even if it's, through a screen, right? It's going to be hard for you to work on things after a while, especially if it's been longer than 3 months. Okay, the next nugget, you can't really multitask, you task switch. All right, so this is kind of like, I don't know if a microprocessor analogy works here or not, but because there are microprocessors that actually are able to multitask. But let's take it back. If you have just like one computing element on your computer, right? One processing element that can only do one thing at a time. That thing can't do multiple things all at the same time. You have to end up introducing more processing elements. If it wants to do more than one thing, it can't do it at the same time. What it in fact has to do is it has to switch between the tasks. Okay? And anytime you do this, it's called a context switch. Anytime you do a context switch with a microprocessor, there's a penalty that you have to incur, right? You might have to access stuff that has gone into a higher level of storage. Like you might have to go out to main memory or even out to hard disk storage or whatever. And so when you switch context, there's some lead time that you have to take into account. And then if you switch back to the original task that you were working on, the same thing is going to apply there. All right. So unless you have multiple of those CPUs or those processing elements, you're not going to be able to multitask. So the same thing goes with our brains. All right, our brains are kind of like single-threaded processors. They have one processing element to do work at the same time. All right. Now, with that, some of the tasks that you do require using the same parts of the brains in different ways. So, as example here, convergence and divergence. All right, convergence and divergence use the same parts of the brain. We talked about divergence and convergence earlier. They use them in different ways. So you don't want to try to both diverge and converge an idea at the same time. You want to break it up into pieces. Usually divergence comes first, and then convergence comes later. All right. Once you've had a chance to diverge and come up with a lot of ideas, you have to prune those ideas from that big pile into a couple of concrete ideas by converging. Right. Even tasks that use different parts of the brain still use the same limited cognitive resources. All right. Example, how versus why. So for the cognitive resources thing, I've said in my classes in the past that it's okay to listen to music while you are doing homework. And that's true, right? The part of your brain that listens to music is different than the part of the brain that you would use to do homework. However, it depends on the kind of music, in a sense, right? Because if the music is incredibly complex, it's going to start to make use of those limited cognitive resources, and it may actually start taking away, not necessarily the specific parts of the brain that you're using to do your homework, but it is taking away the resources that your brain is using. So if you're trying to listen to some really complex symphony or something, or whatever, and your brain starts focusing on that and using more cognitive resources, it's going to impact the ability that you can do your homework. Not in the same way as if the listening of music was using the same part of the brain that you're using to do your homework, but it has a sort of indirect effect. All right, at this point in the lecture, I usually like to do an activity where I ask for some volunteers. Obviously, we're not doing that since this is an asynchronous lecture, but I encourage you to just attempt this, just for the heck of it. All right, and so I'm going to run through the activity for you right now so you can see what I mean. So the first thing to do is to draw 4 straight lines across a piece of paper at relatively equal intervals. So I actually can show you an example of this. You've seen this whiteboard thing sitting over here forever, and I've never used it. So you just draw like 4 equally spaced lines across the paper, okay? Next thing you want to do is write multitasking is worse than a lie when I say go. All right, and so I would time the effort. And so I'd write multitasking is a lie. I have no idea how long that took. Whatever, it took some time. Okay, so that's just got to remember what that time is. Next round on line. Whoops, I already messed up the number of lines, whatever. I'm going to write the numbers from 1 to 27 in order, and I'm going to time this one, okay? So for this one, 1 to 27, so I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Oh, I ran out of space. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Like that. Okay, whatever. I timed that thing. Okay, and then the last round, I have to write simultaneously multitasking is worse than a lie, and also the numbers 1 to 27, alternating letters and numbers between the two. All right, so on this line right here, I have to write multitasking is a lie, and on this line down here, I have to write the numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 up to 24, but I have to alternate. Okay, it turns out multitasking is worse than a lie has 27 letters in it. Okay, I'm not sure if it includes the spaces or not, but roughly 27, right? And so for this one, I'm not going to do it because I know that what's going to happen is I have to do M1, U2, L3. See, I've already started to introduce a delay here because I forget where I am when I context switch, right? So I also talked, which was even worse. Okay, yeah. So I was trying to do multiple things there. Not only was I trying to write multitasking as a lie and finish it, but I was also trying to write all the numbers and finish those. And at the same time, I was trying to think about what I was trying to teach and also deliver it to you with my mouth, right? So, like if we were to actually time that, you would discover that the time that it took me to write the 2 different statements alternating between the 2 is going to be way more than simply the addition of how long it took me to do the first and the second rounds, right? So round 3 is going to take much longer than simply adding together the times for rounds 1 and 2. Okay, so there's an example. There's an example there for more multitasking things. So in practice, what you're going to want to do for this is that you're going to want to try to reduce the amount of attempted multitasking, which is a lie, and really approach it from the fact that it's multitasking. Task switching, right? So when you got your email open and when you got your text messages open and when you got your Facebook open and you got all of the various distractions that you can have in your life, every time one of those things pops up, it's a task switch. All right, it causes your brain to context switch, and it causes you to get out of what's called flow. All right, it interrupts your cognitive processes. If you want to think about it from a thinking perspective, your stage 2 thinking. I think it was stage 2 thinking. I can't even remember anymore. But you don't want to get out of that, because getting back into that kind of thinking, getting back into that flow, has its own impact. Okay, so try to reduce the amount of task switching as best you can. All right, the last neuroscience nugget, system 2 thinking. That's what it was. Now, see, I had to give my cognitive brain a second. I had to take a break and to figure out that it was system 2 thinking, not stage 2 thinking. All right, the last one is to avoid pop neuroscience. So what do I mean by pop neuroscience? It's the kind of neuroscience that you would read in like a Popular Mechanics or a Popular Science magazine. All right, it's not neuroscience. Excuse me. That's excuse me. It's not neuroscience that's based on like solid scientific research or evidence. It's something that, you know, like is just a kind of like a person that says, oh, I have an intuition that this is actually what's going to happen here. All right. Another reason, or sorry, the main reason here is that it's still a new discipline. Okay. And things can change. The next one is that knowing the parts of the brain doesn't help you do anything. Okay. Unless you're a brain surgeon. So who cares if it's your prefrontal cortex or your anterior, who was it or whatever? Unless you're a brain surgeon, knowing the parts of the brain isn't going to help you do anything. Okay. In fact, the stuff that we've talked about today is going to be more important than knowing what the parts of the brain are from a cognitive perspective. Another one that I thought was really funny, especially because it was used at the very end of this presentation, is that people will believe a story if it involves neuroscience parts and pictures. So, imagine ending a presentation on neuroscience by saying that if you say neuroscience is involved in a presentation, people will tend to believe it more. It's sort of circular logic or something. And then finally, there are lots of myths and plausible ideas that may or not be true. Okay, one of the examples, I'm not too familiar with it, is mirror neurons. All right, the presenter basically said that mirror neurons are a joke and they're pop neuroscience, they're fake. All right, but people want to believe them because, one, they're neuroscience. People tend to believe just about anything when you say it's connected to neuroscience. But two, it has a really cool and flashy result. Okay, look up mirror neurons if you're interested in learning more about it, whether it's true or not. All right, so that's the end of the presentation. Hopefully you've got some interesting tips and nuggets of neuroscience from it, and that you can apply these to your everyday life and be a more creative thinker. Go out, take a walk in the woods in the cold, take some snacks that are tasty, then come home and take a shower, and maybe you'll solve world peace or something, or not solve world peace. Discover how to create world peace. I don't know. Whatever. Bye.